Good morning, everybody, and my apologies for the break in transmission yesterday and that my lecture couldn't come through because of the load shedding and I was hotspotting from my phone and that didn't seem to work too well. So I'm just going to do a short run through what we talked about and in case you want to refer to it and in case you did not manage to hear what I was talking about yesterday. So the point of this lecture is really to look at human rights and legal issues for people who have intellectual disability. And my focus here is really on people with severe to profound intellectual disability who often have their right to being human and their right to education and a multitude of rights questioned because of their inability to communicate and possibly for people not to understand how they experience the world. So let's jump in then. And I gave you those two videos to look at, the one with Peter Singer being interviewed and the other one, a lecture by Eva Kitte. So I must apologize if these were a little bit shocking in the first place. I gather from some students that they really, the argument by Peter Singer was rather shocking for them to hear. But I think it's not a bad thing to know about it because these are people that are respected and they are philosophers and these are some of the views that are out there. So I think it's as well to know what is happening. So Peter Singer's argument is that human and animal rights are just as important as each other and that an animal that has a ability to experience and understand the world that is superior to a human being who perhaps is not able to do so because of their severe disability. So that animal has more rights than that human being. What he does is he actually opposes human and animal rights. And then some people are arguing, and it certainly came up in our discussion in the group, that you don't have to put them against each other, but to adopt both human and animal rights. So that's one argument. And then you will notice that Singer referred to the anencephalic. That is a person who does not have a cortex and has very limited experience and ability to experience the world. And he maintains that an animal who is better able to understand and to respond to the world has a similar or perhaps even greater right to dignity than the human being who is so profoundly disabled. So I think that what is problematic for me here, and you can decide for yourselves how you see it, but I think that he doesn't give any allowance for the way that people experience the world that he doesn't understand. So does that person who has no cortex, do they not experience anything? Do we really know that? And yes, that is true for it, whereas an anencephalic, a person who doesn't have a cortex, might be a very extreme case with very little response to the world. But it's once again, where do you draw the line? So do you draw the line there? And what about somebody who does show some response to the world? And how much response do they need to show? And how would you draw the line between where somebody is not deserving of human dignity and another person is? So that creates a problem, is where does one draw the line? Then the input by Eva Kitte is really directly in contrast to what Singer is saying. What Kitte argues is that what makes human beings human is the way that we are able to relate to and to understand their experiences. So she gives the example in her talk about the Japanese prisoner of war in America, and she shows these examples of refugees who have not been given a refuge, and talks about what about, are they actually human? And she says because we're able to empathize with them, because we'll be able to put the I in there, we can see ourselves in that position. That is what makes us human and makes human beings human. It's not so easy for us to put ourselves in the position of an animal, which once again is not to say that animals don't have animal rights, but maybe they're different to human rights. So being human is living among others as equal, and she argues very strongly that we need to defend people with intellectual disability because they are part of us and our families and our communities. And this is reflected in her own personal life because Eva Kitay is the daughter of Sesha, who is profoundly disabled and is now in her 40s, I think, and is still unable to communicate verbally and take any care of herself. But she has a very warm and loving relationship with her child. So Kitay's argument is what makes us human is the fact that we relate to each other. So humanity is a relational association. And if you might find that this rings bells for you with Ubuntu, the term Ubuntu, I am human because I am a human being because you are a human being. I don't know if I'm getting that quite right. But anyway, my humanity is created through your humanity. We do this together. So she asks, would it be possible to think of someone else's child as the same as an animal? And can we see ourselves in that position? And mostly, for the most part, we do. We can see ourselves in the position of others, and therefore our shared humanity. So the argument there is that everybody, what I would support is Kitay's argument that we are human because we are in interaction with humans. It's a relational thing. So what does that then mean if we look at human rights? And what is the problem with human rights when we think of people with intellectual disability is that a lot of the ideas about human rights being something that belongs to everybody are based upon appeals to reason and absolute truth. That is that if I am able to reason and I'm able to understand the world, then I'm deserving of rights. And this is the idea of a rational individual who enters into power relations and therefore has rights. Sorry, that was just a phone call. So if you think about rights, it's I need to understand my rights and I need to fight for my rights. But that doesn't really work if you find it difficult to understand and if you find it difficult to actually stand up for your rights. And these are things that people with intellectual disability, given the definition that we've had, that they've got difficulty in understanding these conceptual things, these are things that can be difficult for them to do. But having said that, it's not to say that they can't be supported to be able to do more than we expect at this stage. So there is a whole field, a whole area of study in the field of intellectual disability on supported decision making. And that is supporting people with intellectual disabilities to make decisions for themselves. So the argument is not to say that people with intellectual disability do not have rights or can't exercise rights. The argument is to say that in order to exercise their rights, they need to have support. And in our world, where does that support come from? It comes from the family for the most part. So the family is an important player in human rights for people with intellectual disability. Why? Because a lot of people with intellectual disability, but certainly not all, and we're not trying to restrict what is possible, but a lot of people with intellectual disability will be dependent on their families for most of their life. So in the Western world or in America and Canada and so on, there might be services provided for adults with intellectual disability that would allow them to live independently or to live away from their families, but that is not the case in South Africa, or at least it's a very, very small number that it applies to, and most of them will be with their families. So that means that when we talk about thinking about the rights of a person with intellectual disability, we have to think about the rights within that family context. And that's once again where Iba Kite comes in so useful in understanding it, because she talks about the relationships. And when we're talking about the rights of people with intellectual disability, it's useful to think about the relationships that they have around them that are able to support them in achieving their rights. So that's rights in general, but let's just have a quick look at right to education. At this stage in South Africa, children with severe to profound intellectual disability are either at home, in partial residential care centres, and in special schools. And the majority of them are facing neglect and lack of access to services. For example, they are not benefiting from compulsory schooling and all the things that go with it. So in South Africa, there's the feeding scheme, there's school health services, and various other supports that are linked to compulsory schooling. So they miss out on all of that. And part of the reason that they have been excluded from the education system is that they were seen as ineducable. Ineducable meaning not able to be educated, and that was the word that was used. But this has changed somewhat in a belated process of acknowledging the right to basic education for all children, including in this group. And as you learned in our earlier on in the course, when you read the article by Brian and myself and Tessa Wood and Fatima Isa around the Western Cape Forum for Intellectual Disability, you will know that they actually fought for the right of education for children with profound intellectual disability. And one of the key pillars of this was to dispel the myth that they were ineducable, but to say they are educable, but the form that education takes might be a little different. So let's then just hone in a bit more on learners with severe and profound disability. And this group is not a homogeneous group. That is, they are not all the same. They are all different to each other. And they often have additional physical disabilities and or sensory disabilities. It's a kind of general tendency that the more severe the intellectual disability, the more likely there are to be other disabilities going with it. This might be deafness or blindness or cerebral palsy or autism, epilepsy, those other areas. Some children in this profound, I call it severe to profound intellectual disability, but it's also, it can be, another term for it which I quite like is profound and multiple intellectual disability. And some of these learners may be ambulant, that means they are able to walk, but most of them have medical or paramedical needs in addition to their learning difficulties. And they also may behave in ways that challenge staff, parents, and other learners, which result in their isolation, making it difficult to involve them in positive education experiences. So these might be inappropriate noises or inappropriate behaviors such as self-harm or similar kinds of things, which can be quite disturbing to the group. This group will rely on adult support to enable them to enact that environment, and importantly, this group will be dependent on other adults for the rest of their lives. So that is quite a weighty thing to consider when you're thinking of education. These children are headed for a life where they will be dependent. So if we've got this definition of the profound intellectual disability, and maybe just to quickly run through it, although Taryn has been through this with us. So in understanding the world and understanding concepts, they are at a very low level and may use objects in goal-directed fashion for self-care, work, and recreation. So that might be a bit of toothbrushing, brushing hair, that kind of thing. They maybe do some matching, but they often, as I've said, have motor and sensory impairments that go with it. In the social domain, they often have very limited understanding of verbal communication, but they can understand some instructions or gestures and may express their own desires and emotions largely through non-verbal, non-symbolic communication. What does that mean? That means like through smiling or laughing or making noises, and sometimes for this group by behavior. So if there's something that upsets them and they aren't able to say that they're unhappy, they might indulge in a particular behavior, like say head banging or making a noise or something that looks like a bad behavior, but it's actually just their way of communicating that I don't like what's happening. So one needs to pay very careful attention to the communication here. The individual enjoys relationship with well-known family members and initiates and responds to social interactions. And then in the practical domain, once again, that's very limited, and they aren't really able to achieve much in terms of acting on the world out there. So, as I've mentioned, the court case to address these educational needs, and the ruling stated that reasonable measures must be taken for an affordable access to a basic education of an adequate quality, that they should have the use of adequate facilities for this purpose, adequate staff, appropriate transport, and that the staff in the special scarce centres should receive proper accreditation, and others should be trained to provide education to these children. And what you'll see from here is that the ruling stopped short of requiring the department to actually include these learners in the education system, because the special care centres are not part of our national compulsory education system. So the Department of Education is given the role to support these centres, but not necessarily to provide the education for these children. So it's a little bit of it's a vast improvement on what was there before, but it is a little bit of an in-between situation, and I think there is a growing recognition that this is not a full right to education, because it's not on a par with what other children would be getting, in which case it would be free and compulsory, and there would be qualified teachers. Because you know that in the Department of Education, you cannot get a job unless you have qualification of a minimum standard. And that is because our children deserve to be taught by qualified teachers. And this right hasn't been accorded to this group yet, because their teachers are not qualified. And Chantal will tell us more about that next week. So then the question that I want to leave you with, and that we will start our session with next time, is you going to the Jamboard and thinking about what would a quality education for learners with severe to profound intellectual disability look like. How do you see it? What is quality education for these children? Is it the same or is it different? I'd love to hear your views. So thanks very much, and see you next week.